So, Sophie Cunningham, it happened again. The WNBA have fined her again.
Hashtag WNBA. Sophie Cunningham fine script. The WNBA just made what might be the most catastrophic public relations blunder in recent memory. And it's all because Sophie Cunningham had the audacity to tell the truth. What started as a simple TikTok video has now exploded into a full-scale controversy that has fans literally...
We were talking about, like, our first week, what people had to say. Well, the WNBA fined me.
No! You got fined for episode 1?
Dude, they fined me $1,500. I'm like, what? I'm like, this is just the beginning.
Opening their wallets to fight back against the league. But here's the kicker. The WNBA's response to criticism has been so spectacularly tone-deaf that they've managed to turn a minor complaint into a national story that's getting picked up by major news outlets. And trust me, by the time you hear what they did next, you'll understand why fans are calling this the biggest league meltdown of the year. Sophie Cunningham, the Phoenix Mercury guard who runs the popular podcast Show Me Something.
And what's pretty wild, and I made this comment because I shared, she has come out, she's been fined again, by the way, by the WNBA because she made comments criticizing when she told them and talked about getting fined for this on her podcast.
Dropped a TikTok video back in July that sent shockwaves through the WNBA front office. In that video, she basically called out the league's referees for being, well, let's just say she wasn't complimentary about their job performance. Now, anyone who's watched more than 5 minutes of WNBA basketball this season knows Sophie wasn't exactly breaking new ground here. The officiating has been a constant source of frustration for players, coaches, and fans alike. But apparently, speaking this obvious truth out loud was crossing a line the league wasn't willing to tolerate. The WNBA's response was swift and predictable. They slapped Sophie with a $500 fine for her burst of honesty.
Oh, way. I'm glad that you saved that for this and didn't text me, because that's unreal. I mean, it's like, it's cool for the pod, but that's kind of a bummer. Do they, when you get fined, do they put like verbatim, like quote here, like this is why you're being fined and this is why it's this much? Or is it like, hey, quit talking shit on us, Venmo us like $1,500?
No. What happens is they email our GM, and she pulls me aside and she goes, come here, Soph, I have to talk to you. And this was in like front of everybody. And
as if putting a price tag on truth-telling would somehow make the officiating problems disappear. But here's where this story takes a turn that nobody saw coming, and where the league's complete lack of understanding about public relations becomes painfully obvious. Instead of just taking the fine and moving on, Sophie did what any normal person would do. She talked about it on her podcast. She discussed getting fined, shared her thoughts on the whole situation, and even tried to be diplomatic about it, acknowledging that refereeing is a difficult job and that some officials do good work. You'd think that would be the end of it.
And I was like, what did I do now? And she just smiled and she goes, hey, they're going to fine you again. They're like, I was like, I even told them, I even credited them that their job was hard. I did say that. And I said that I would not be good at it. I did say that. Like, look at the whole picture. What are we doing? But yeah, so I got fined for that. So
right? A player gets fined, talks about it briefly, shows some understanding for the other side, and everyone moves forward. But no, the WNBA looked at Sophie's measured, reasonable discussion of her fine and decided that this, too, was somehow a violation that needed to be punished. So they fined her again, this time for $1,500. Let that sink in for a moment. The WNBA fined a player for talking about getting fined. We're now living in a world where mentioning that you were punished for criticizing referees is itself a punishment.
Referees that were actually doing their jobs, getting calls correct, and by the way, keeping some kind of law and order in the league. You wouldn't have a player that's having to go on their podcast talking about the officiating blows.
Punishable offense. The total damage? $2,000. All because Sophie Cunningham had the nerve to point out what everyone already knew and then had the additional audacity to mention that she got in trouble for it. It's like something straight out of a dystopian novel, except instead of being a profound commentary on authoritarianism, it's just the WNBA being the WNBA. The absurdity is so thick you could cut it with a knife, and yet somehow it gets even worse. When Sophie's general manager pulled her aside to deliver the news about the second fine, it happened in front of the entire team. Picture this scene. Sophie's just going about her day when her GM approaches with that look that says, "We need to talk." The GM tells her, almost apologetically, that the league is fining her again. Sophie had even gone out of her way to be fair in her podcast comments, specifically mentioning that officiating is challenging work and that she wouldn't be good at it herself. But none of that mattered. The league had decided that any discussion of their disciplinary actions was itself worthy of discipline. The timing of this double fine fiasco couldn't have been worse for the WNBA. Right around the same time, the Wall Street Journal published an opinion piece suggesting that federal agencies should investigate whether Caitlin Clark's civil rights have been violated due to the treatment she's received in the league. Major news outlets are starting to ask serious questions about whether the WNBA creates hostile work environments. And the league's response to all this scrutiny is to fine players for having honest conversations about officiating problems. It's like watching someone rearrange deck chairs while the Titanic is sinking, except somehow even more pointless. But here's where the story really exposes the twisted priorities of WNBA leadership. For nearly 2 years, fans have watched players take cheap shots at Caitlin Clark with minimal consequences. Marina Mabrey blindsided Clark with a dangerous hit. DJ Carrington nearly took out Clark's eye with a reckless play. These incidents, which involved actual physical danger to a player, resulted in barely a slap on the wrist. Yet, Sophie Cunningham says the refs need to do better at their jobs, and suddenly the league becomes very concerned about maintaining proper standards. It's like ignoring a house fire while getting upset that someone didn't use a coaster on your coffee table. The fan reaction has been absolutely explosive in the best possible way. Within hours of news breaking about Sophie's fines, people started suggesting GoFundMe campaigns to pay her penalties. A petition demanding changes to WNBA officiating began circulating and gained signatures so fast you could practically watch the numbers climb in real time. Social media erupted with fans roasting the league's decision, with one particularly pointed observation summing up the absurdity perfectly. The WNBA fined Sophie for her podcast comments, but lets players beat up Caitlin Clark for 2 seasons without meaningful consequences. This isn't organized activism or some coordinated campaign. This is organic fan frustration that's been building for months, finally finding an outlet. The petition signatures aren't coming from basketball insiders or media personalities. They're coming from regular fans who are fed up with watching a league that seems more interested in controlling narratives than fixing obvious problems. People are adding their names every few minutes, and that kind of sustained engagement doesn't happen unless there's real, widespread dissatisfaction with how things are being handled. Now, let's be fair for a moment. Most professional sports leagues do fine players for publicly criticizing officials. It's a common practice across sports, and the WNBA isn't unique in having these policies. But here's the crucial difference. Most professional leagues also have officiating that's competent enough that players don't feel compelled to speak out about it constantly. When your referees are so consistently problematic that players regularly feel the need to voice their frustrations, maybe the issue isn't that players are talking about it. Maybe the issue is that there's so much to talk about. Compare WNBA officiating to the NFL, for instance. Yes, NFL refs catch heat sometimes, and yes, there are controversial calls that get debated for weeks. But compared to what WNBA players deal with on a nightly basis, NFL officiating looks like a masterclass in precision and professionalism. When NFL referees look 1,000% more competent than yours, you might want to focus on fixing the actual problem instead of silencing the people who are pointing it out. What makes this situation even more infuriating is that Sophie's criticism wasn't even particularly harsh. She didn't go on some profanity-filled rant or make personal attacks against specific referees. She essentially said that the refs aren't good at their jobs, which is an objectively verifiable statement that anyone with functioning eyes can confirm by watching a few games. The league's response shows they're far more concerned with controlling the narrative than they are with addressing the legitimate concerns that sparked that narrative in the first place. This is where the WNBA walked face first into what's known as the Streisand effect, the phenomenon where trying to suppress information only makes it more widely known. By fining Sophie for her initial comments, they guaranteed that more people would hear about her criticism than would have otherwise. By fining her again for talking about the first fine, they've turned what should have been a minor story into a major controversy that's now getting national media attention. Her podcast probably got more downloads from this controversy than it would have received in months of regular operation. The league's handling of the situation reveals a fundamental misunderstanding of how modern media works. In an era where athletes have direct access to fans through social media, podcasts, and other platforms, trying to control criticism through fines and penalties isn't just ineffective. It's actively counterproductive. Sophie's podcast represents exactly the kind of authentic, behind-the-scenes content that sports leagues should be encouraging. It gives fans genuine access to player perspectives and creates real engagement with the sport. Instead of supporting this kind of content creation, the WNBA is actively discouraging it by hitting Sophie with financial penalties every time she says something even remotely critical. And remember, she even tried to be diplomatic about the whole thing, acknowledging that officiating is difficult and that some refs do good work. But apparently, even that level of nuance and understanding isn't enough to avoid punishment. The message being sent is crystal clear. Any criticism of league operations is forbidden, no matter how constructive, measured, or reasonable it might be. The fan response to Sophie's treatment shows just how disconnected the league office is from its actual audience. People aren't rallying to defend the WNBA's decision. Instead, they're offering to pay Sophie's fines and demanding changes to the very officiating problems she highlighted. When your punishment creates more criticism than the original offense, you've fundamentally mishandled the situation. The fact that fans are willing to financially support a player for speaking out against league problems isn't normal fan behavior. Usually, people just complain on social media and move on with their lives. But the level of engagement around Sophie's situation suggests that fans are genuinely frustrated with league leadership and are looking for ways to express that frustration. Meanwhile, the contrast with how the league handles actual on-court problems couldn't be more stark. Players can take dangerous shots at Caitlin Clark with minimal consequences, but talking about officiating problems on a podcast results in immediate financial penalties. The priorities are so backward that it would be laughable if it weren't so frustrating for people who actually care about the sport. This entire mess could have been avoided if the WNBA had simply ignored Sophie's initial comments, or, better yet, used them as feedback to improve their officiating standards. Instead, they've turned a minor criticism into a major controversy that's now attracting attention from major news outlets and raising questions about league leadership that go far beyond officiating concerns. Sophie Cunningham's fines are ultimately just a symptom of a much bigger problem with WNBA leadership. They're more concerned about managing their image than they are about managing the issues that are damaging their image. Until that fundamental priority shift happens, expect more situations exactly like this one. The league just proved they're more worried about controlling criticism than they are about fixing the problems that generate that criticism. And Sophie's truth-telling has cost them far more in negative publicity than they could have ever saved by staying quiet. What started as one player's honest assessment has become a perfect case study in how not to handle public relations in the modern media landscape. The WNBA created their own crisis, escalated it unnecessarily, and now they're dealing with consequences that could have been completely avoided with better leadership and basic common sense.